We'll just be going live in a few minutes here. Just making sure everything is working right. Hello, everyone. This is Army of Quad here with another fun-filled edition of the Quadcast. And we'll get the webcam going here. I just need to tell it to stop screen sharing. There we go. Hello, everyone. Well, hello, no one at the moment, but maybe most of you are going to watch this later after the fact. Which, gee, I shouldn't have started like 5 minutes early, because now that puts that at the beginning of the file. We'll fix that in post. Anyways, another fun-filled edition of the Quadcast, and it's the long-awaited results of the EV-4 shootout that we're going to be covering here tonight. This has been a slow process. Took me a bit longer than I had hoped to put the whole thing together, because I kept on trying to figure out how do I want to do this, and finally we came up with something that makes sense. And you know, it's been a very interesting process, very interesting, and a lot of things that I observed and wanted to say, but I didn't want to start saying anything biased or anything about that, or say anything. So I've been very careful about what I've said. So it's really exciting now tonight to kind of talk about, dig into the materials and what we found, what we hear, what other people have heard. This is really exciting stuff. For those that might have tuned into this video and don't know what's going on, there is a way back when, in the early days of quadraphonic sound, there was a format developed by Electro Voice called EV-4. And I'm really not clear on all the details about the EV-4 format. That's something that I kind of wish was better documented, because I'm not even convinced that there was only one single formula or format of EV-4. I think at some point they changed their decoders to be more compatible with other matrix formats in the pre-SQ days. And I'm not sure if it was they made their decoders better, or the original decoders were only to synthesize from stereo, and then the second one was actually for encoded materials, or if it was some compromised decoder to be compatible that just really does them all bad. I don't know. I forget the details of what I've read, and what I've read, I don't think was ever very clear, because I did do a lot of research in college, reading through old stereo review magazines, so I don't think it's very well documented. I mean, there's a formula that's documented that people are following for these software decoding processes, but I'm not sure that was the only way, or what else Electro Voice did. And some years ago, when I reached out to Electro Voice for details, they had nothing. But what we do have are a lot of old recordings that are encoded for Electro Voice, which was also called Stereo 4, which also has confusion, because I wasn't quite sure if Stereo 4 and EV-4 are exactly the same or different variations of the same thing. But best I can tell, I think the general belief at this time is that EV-4 is EV-4, and they may have built different decoders along the way, but EV-4 is EV-4. And so what that brings us to is Oxford Dickey has done a lot of work on software decoding processes to deal with EV-4, among many other matrix formats. And we have the Involve decoder that it was found does a really good job with QS, and then they developed the SQ mode, so it has Involve and SQ. And then when people started asking about, well, what about something for EV-4, it was said, run it through the Involve mode, it does that. And there's been a lot of discussion and debate back and forth. How could the same decoder be the best decoder for QS and EV-4 when they're two different formats with different formulas? And some people go, oh, they're compatible formats, and other people go, oh, whoa, hold on. That formula completely different. There's no way they're compatible. And so I just decided, well, let's, formulas, numbers, equations, I'm not into all that. What I'm into is, how does it sound? So let's just straight up listen to it, put a blind comparison test out there, and see what we all hear. And, have fun with it. And so that's what we put out there. And, I'm already finding in the process that, I would have done things differently if I did it again. For one thing, this shootout was rather long. About a half hour worth of music times 3, because we had a discrete version and a version A, version B, one being a software process, the other one being the Involve decoder. So that made for an hour and a half of sitting to get through all of it if you're going to do it all in one sitting. And I think I would have taken some materials out of it and shortened it. I felt like I wanted to have a wide selection of things, and I think I went a little overboard with there. So my apologies to the people out there that did this if you found it was too long. But I appreciate the people that got involved. So let's get to it. First, I'd like to post, for those of you that actually did listen to all these and wonder, well, what was what? Let's post. I'm sorry, I should have rehearsed this. Best way I can post that is to do that. So let's go ahead and post what the results were. I'm just going to share my screen here. So right here, well, this isn't the results. This is the key, what it was. So for those of you that listen to it, or you go back and listen, as you can see, the thing about random is that you could have a bunch in a row, or not. And if you try to force random to be random, you end up forcing it to flip-flop. So yeah, the first three were the same. A was software, B was the involve. Then the next two were A involve, B software, and then back to software involve. So if anyone still has their materials and want to go back and test or go back over the notes, if you're curious what was what and what you thought of each, here's your key right here. Of course, I'll be posting this on the Quadraphonic Quad forums after this episode, so that you can have this handy-dandy guide. Pay no attention to my Windows not being genuine in the bottom right corner. It totally is genuine. Microsoft just doesn't know it. Yeah, I've been trying to figure that out, but it's not worth the time. Yeah, so that was that. The next thing I have are, of course, the results. And I'm just going to set that as my desktop. The best way for me to post this is actually set it as my desktop background, then screen share my second monitor. And there it is. First track, A Shade of Brass. Hands down clean sweep. 5 people like the involve. 0 for the... Now, here's the thing. But let's... You know what? I should have prefaced this before I put this slide up. Is that because it looks like a clean sweep, but a lot of people commented that both did a very good job, and that it was very close in some cases. So that's the case. I mean, it's not to say that anything is bad, but it was very close. But it looks like we have an edge for the involve for EV-4. Shade of Brass was a clean sweep. The Lighthouse one was kind of close with them running neck and neck, nearly. Jet Plane, the third track, another clean sweep for the involved decoder. The Big Band Moog one was tied. One person skipped that track, wasn't into the style of music. Then the other Bobby Byrne track was 4-1, and the last one, another clean sweep for the involve. One of the reviews didn't get to that track, so there are only 4 votes on that one as well, and that's how it broke down. But I'd like to go over the actual notes, because it came down to a vote at the end. Which one do you prefer? But that doesn't tell us much. So I did want to go through and read some of the responses that we got from that. And I just have a document here. I just need to find the right folder. Here we go. Here are the notes. I was going to kind of go through each track one by one and talk about them. So we'll start with Shades of Brass. The A version was the software process. And the notes on the software process was, one person said the channels sound like they may be wrong. Other person said, disappointing, a bit diffuse. The whistle meant to be in rear right is in the front right. Next comment, left rear much weaker, right rear smeared more from discrete, and front to back pretty separate, side to side less so. Another comment on the software was that it's good on its own, decrease in separation apparent when it's compared to the discrete. The sound fill placement is not as precise, there's kind of smearing going on. So that was kind of the general thought on the software process, was that compared to the discrete, it was kind of disappointing and diffuse and smeared, and which, you know, I think both processes have a bit of that. And the involve comments were that it seems quite close to the discrete. Better all around. Whistle split between front and right rear is not is at least partially in the rear, so it's a bit more precise than the other one. The left rear has parts that were never there. Right rear now has both rear parts. And then another comment that the second one, which is the involved superior by far, increased sound field stability, leakage still present, but flat out shocked. at just how discreet sounding this Dakota track was. So yeah, the Involved did a really good job with the first one, the Bobby Byrne Shade of Brass. And I actually am going to discuss that one a bit further. I decided the first two tracks we can dig into a little bit on this episode. The second track is a fun track, One Fine Morning by Lighthouse. Finding a quad version of that was quite interesting. And one thing I got to say after spending some time with that track today, it really is best discreet, but that probably goes for all things. So notes that people left on the software decode was that the round of room pan guitar ends up parked in the rear right, strings rear left, same as discreet. So that part it did pretty good. That beginning part, the guitar ping pongs the channels, pretty much did that right. Sounds a bit thin. Early movement of guitar sounds good, but isn't correct, I believe. Doesn't settle into real right for duration. I guess that comment means that it doesn't sound like it stayed stable in the rear right for the whole time. Another comment that was on the software decode: flying elements keep the same pattern, doesn't land squarely in the rear right. After first chorus, guitar does settle closer to rear right, but not discreet. Violin part far less located than discreet. Piano solo seems about the same placement, which is in the front. Final guitar solo is not isolated in rear right, more in right side. Front to back less prominent. Notes on the Involved decode on it. The random room pan guitar and strings more diffuse generally. There's more life to it. Guitar sounds good with correct placement, ends up in rear right. And flying element has close feel to discreet with slightly better fidelity. Still not as discreet for either of the rears, but closer than the first one, the software one. Piano sounds the same, but maybe a little cleaner. Final guitar solo smeared front to back as on the first one. So yeah, that one I think it was. Well, that one wasn't clear. That one was 3-2. So that was, I think the notes there were, kind of that they both. It may have been a toss-up even, really, between those two. The third track, Jet Plane, which everyone preferred the Involved version of. Notes about the software on that was that the vocals, strings, and tambourine are diffuse. Fails to put strings in the rear right. The rear is a mess. Generally less discreet, hard to pinpoint elements, end jet across front with no rears. Now the notes on the Involved decode: less lead vocals strong in rear right, whereas it's front right on the discreet. The tambourine is in the rear left, which is correct. It's got better decay and less sibilance. Bells in the wrong location, but sounds better than the software process. Strings, piano, brass, mostly where they belong. The plain swoosh at the end sounds better. And another note on that one: closer to true discreet with horns in the rear left. Vocal is still full right, front and rear. Other front elements biased front with some bleed to the rears. Final effects closer to pan on the discreet. Yeah, I think what we're finding is that a lot of these, the Involve did better, but they both kind of smear things. It's probably in the format. One thing I observed, and I think some of these notes reflect on, is that when I dug into it, the software process is better at removing the front leakage from the back channels. The back channels don't have as much front leakage in them, whereas the Involve is better at removing the back leakage from the front, which makes the things that are in the back stand out more as being in the back. Just a little, but that was on one track. I noticed that. I don't. It might not be quite that simple. The big band Moog track, which is a fun album of mine that I had to include a track in there. But if I did this again, I'd probably cut that one out, or maybe not include two tracks from there. But I did want to include something that was not on the same samplers. So the first one was involved, and the notes on that was that it sounds off relative to the discrete. Another note on that, opens well, anti-clockwise swirl, mostly correct. Bass wrong and walk on by, it's not in rears. And then another comment, seems to retain the flavor of the full discrete without being as fully isolated. Notes on the software decode of that is that it's closer to the discrete than the involved decode. Sounds cleaner. Swirls aren't correct, less convincing. Bass wrong and walk on by, not in rears. So that comment was left on both of them. And then another comment, this version sounds more big stereo. One of the weakest reproductions of the discrete elements. Things feel more attenuated up and down rather than moving. Now that one was tied 2-2, and I think all around it just didn't do well. So I don't know if it's the materials or, I mean, it's on a different label, so it could have been encoded differently. One of those kind of mysteries of EV-4. Now that one is a record. It doesn't say EV-4 anywhere on the cover. It says Stereo 4, which is supposed to be the same thing as EV-4. A lot of the Enoch Light records will say Stereo 4 on them, and some say Electro Voice 4 or EV-4 on them. It's generally understand that Stereo 4 means EV-4, but I've not seen literature of the time period state that definitively. Notes on the next track, another Bobby Byrne, Help Yourself. I probably would have kept it to the, if I was going to do this again, the first 3 tracks are probably enough, because I mean, do we need 2 Bobby Byrne tracks? And did the last one bring anything to it? You know, I don't know. So once again, I didn't want it to be too short. I wanted to get a variety, but it was mostly the same sampler type material with the big band Moog thrown in there that didn't even do that well. Notes on the Involve for Help Yourself by Bobby Byrne doesn't resemble the discrete too much. This is the Involve decoder. One comment says it doesn't resemble the discrete too much. Next comment, opening trumpets, trombones, flutes are okay in positions. Moving bips, not so convincing. The next comment on here, drum spread around the channels when it should be the center front. Lead horns are louder in the rear right, should be louder in the front right. Answer horns still largely in rear left. Elements still leap around, still has a pretty discrete feel to it. And next comment on that is that it seems to retain more of the directional cues in an admittedly cursory listen. So the comments on the software decode on that is that it's closer to the discrete. That was a person that said it doesn't resemble the discrete too much. Another comment on this one, a bit crunchy. Next comment on it, opening trumpets okay, trombones all over the place. Flutes are front right, should be rear right. Moving bips are worse than A. And the next comment on here, drums still spread, horns lead and answer seem center. The mobile elements have far less mobility and seem mostly centered. Those comments kind of sound like a toss-up, but it ended up being 4-1 on there. Oh, well, no, that one, well, let's see. No, wait, I read that wrong. It's one comment says closer to the discrete. The next 3 were kind of said that it was worse. But that was one that I think didn't sound like it was very convincing on either. Then the last track, So Very Happy. You've made me so very happy, Today's People. Comments on the software version. Diffuse, hard to make out where much is coming from. Female chorus, rear right on discrete is everywhere. The vibraphone is okay at the beginning. Vocals are front right, should be rear right. Later, rear left, rear right split of the male-female vocals is awful. Notes on the Involve decode. It more closely resembles the discrete with the female vocals more in the rear right. Has better separation. Opening sounds are all in correct locations. Later, male-female split is male vocals mid-left, front and rear, female vocals mid-right, front and rear. At least the left-right is correct. And that's once again goes back to what I was saying earlier, that the Involve is better at removing the. No, wait, that goes opposite of what I said. I said it was good at removing the back from the front, but here, this one, it didn't really remove the back bleed through from the front. So, I mean, that's, none of my comments are you might observe it doesn't do this well, and then it does it well in a different one. It's kind of interesting that it's not consistent. Now I wish I dived more into all these. I guess it's good I included all these. And the last comment on that one does a noticeably better job of keeping the surrounds out of the front channels. Yeah, that actually, it's funny. Yeah, the later male-female split seems to be center, but then the next comment from someone else, I noticed that it keeps the surrounds out of the front better on the Involve. So maybe it does it better, but didn't for that one effect. I might just go up and pull up that file later on just to take a look at these comments. Now, mind you, a lot of these comments are, the instructions were not to dig it apart and isolate channels. Sit in the middle of the room and listen to it. And it's really hard to kind of pull exactly what you. Sometimes front to back can be a little tricky. So I was wondering how that was going to go, but it looks. I mean, the notes kind of. I'm sorry, I'm at a loss of words at the moment, but it's still very interesting to read over these and see what people found in them and how they compare to what they are. But generally, the consensus has been that mostly the Involve is the better option for EV-4. I mean, it's got more votes. It's got the edge, but that doesn't mean it's absolutely 100% the best, because like the Lighthouse track was 3-2, the Big Band Moog track was tied. So there are some cases where it's really close. And the thing is that the software process is always evolving. In fact, Oxford Dickey recently reached out to me and told me that he's made yet another newer version of the EV-4, which is kind of like, oh, if only we can't redo the shootout. I barely got people to participate on the first one. I can't ask everyone to do this over again. But I think it'd be, if you head on over to Oxford Dickey's site, and I'm going to pull up that, that's Dreaming Spires quadarchive.wordpress.com, and I'll post that link in the comments. And if you scroll down to the second entry from 5th of January, he has reposted the Supersonic Quadraphonic Sound Spectacular, which is the sampler that includes One Fine Morning. And that is, he sent me the stereo recording he had of the sampler that he used to do the software decode. And I ran that through the Involve, and it was his first decode that I used. So now, if you you could go there. There's a link to the torrent. Go ahead, grab it, and you could compare the new One Fine Morning decode to the ones on the posting for the shootout. If you want to compare the script, the new script to the previous script. So I recommend going out there and grabbing that. Dreaming Spires quadarchive.wordpress.com. The thing is, though, is that the real question here is, how does the Involve do on QS? That is really going to be where we really find out, can a decoder do a great job on both EV-4 and QS? Because I think certainly we've determined here that, EV-4 doesn't not nearly as good as discrete, but if you do have EV-4 material and you want to listen to it, the Involve decoder is a very good option. Definitely worth having if you want something that does EV-4. It's not perfect, but it's not a perfect format. Not to put down the software decoding, however, though. That's certainly another great option. It's just that the process isn't shared, so you can't do it yourself, but certainly worthwhile downloading and obtaining software decoded versions of these things. Because I wouldn't, even though the numbers heavily lean towards the Involve, I would not call this a landslide, because a lot of it was close and there were some differences. And also, who knows what the future of these software decodes holds. I mean, it's already improved. So I decided to dig in myself to the first two tracks to kind of discuss a little bit of them. And the first track on there, I think, was a good track to have. I think the first two tracks are good tracks for these purposes. And the first track is a very kind of discrete quad mix. Very, you know, things are positioned right in their place. And that's A Shade of Brass by Bobby Byrne. It's this one here, which you kind of have a pretty easy to follow mix. Your front channels have bass and drums front and center, synth in the front left, trumpets in the front right, and then we bring up the rear tracks, and we got trombones in the rear left, and flutes in the rear right. And there's also another synthesizer that comes in on the rear light later on in the track. Over here later on, we skipped ahead. Rear right. So it's kind of a straightforward, things are in their corners. So it's a good, you know, opening test to kind of see how they each do. And so if we pull up the software script, we'll kind of pull up the fronts here. And a comment, my thought is that the drums sounded kind of smeared. The trumpets are front, but not as discreet. I mean, here, kind of here, it doesn't sound as prominent. Now, here's the rears by themselves on this. We got a lot of trumpet bleed through here. The trombones don't sound squarely in the left here on the rears. They're certainly leaning towards that. And then also the rear right synth, when I was listening to it, sounds kind of centered. And that's going to come up here in a moment. Let's hear. All right, so here we're still in the back. It doesn't sound prominently in the right here, and in the front. So yeah, that synth part is kind of lying right in the middle of the sound field when it should be prominently rear right. Now, if we pull up the Involve decode, the trumps are a bit more localized. Now, one thing is that the Involve doesn't mess with the left-right. The software process, I think, messes with the left-right some to try to balance everything out. So, because here, I mean, we could hear that the trumpets are definitely in the right on the front. Whereas over here, it's a bit more smeared and diffuse. It's not as square in the right as here. But if we listen to front to back, here we go. We'll go front right and rear right, and we're going to put the, just for the purposes of comparing here, I'm going to put the front right in the left and the rear right in the right. I really didn't do too good with that. But let's also compare to the Involve, just to be fair. I mean, because we heard that the left-right was pretty good on the trumpets. this doesn't do good at keeping the front in the front. It's better at removing the back from the front than it is removing the front from the back. So neither of them did really good at that, but at least the Involve keeps the stereo spread, and it removes the back from the front. So when something lands squarely in the back, you definitely notice that. But when something's in the front, it's kind of seems more centered. Whereas the software process is just kind of more smeared, but I think it's trying to, but it still didn't do good with the trumpets. So that's just kind of my observations there. The Involve did a better job with the synth, the second synth. I'm gonna go back to normal mode here, and put my lefts in the lefts and rights in the rights. So later on here, where the all right. There's some bleed through that synth, but you know, you heard how prominent that synth is. So here the front's alone. It's definitely reduced. In the back, it's leaning towards the right, but it's not square in the right. But at least it's not completely centered. So yeah, I think that one was a clear winner for the Involve. And the second track that I had a chance to kind of dig into and really analyze was the Lighthouse one, which just, you know, it's the closest thing I have to a standard track. I mean, a lot of these things are, you know, the instrumental samplers and not, you know, big hit type stuff. And Lighthouse One Fine Morning was, I'm pretty sure that charted. Certainly a known song. So I think that's probably the best example of a popular song that we have for EV-4 encoding. So I mapped out how the discrete of this works. The drum and bass is square in the front. I mean, if we listen to the back, there's pretty much nothing in the back except hiss and a little bit of bleed through. Might even be tape bleed through. And then the guitar comes in and starts ping-ponging right away, which both methods did fine with the guitar ping-ponging. You definitely heard it go, and it went to the right channels and ping-ponged around the room. So both processes are doing something right for EV-4. And the guitar generally does rest in the rear right on both processes. From my listening. And, you know, the way this maps out, you got your drum bass in the front. The vocals is pretty much in the center of the room. We got vocals in the back. We got vocals in the front. Which is an interesting thing, because the Involve took the vocals out of the back and put them to the front. So that's kind of a that's actually a inaccurate point to the Involve. That the Involve puts things that should be center of the room center front, which is something that one could easily miss or not. No one commented on that, and generally vocals are front and center in mixes. Some mixes do center of the room, but front center is kind of normal, so listening to it on the Involve probably didn't stand out as wrong, and was still an enjoyable listen. Probably didn't take away from the listen, but a technical inaccuracy. Now this tambourine sits in the back and not in the front. See, pretty much it's drums and bass and vocal in the front, and piano. The back generally has guitar in the rear right, violin, strings in the rear left, the horn section across the back, and the tambourines in the back. And backup vocals also sit in the back, mostly, I think. Yeah, no backup vocals in the front. Oh, when I click the wrong way, it starts it over. And once again, we got our piano up in the front, our tambourine in the back. And this is neither process dealt with the tambourines that well. Notice that there's a stereo effect on the tambourines. They're in both rear channels, but it's not sounding dead center in my head. There's some spread out going on there. And none of the processes really conveyed that or brought that across. So if we bring up the software to code on this one, the start there with the drums, kind of even through the front and the back, although the bass certainly is more prominent in the front than the back. And the violin and brass is, well, I mean, the guitar does what it's supposed to do. So the software process dealt with the moving guitar quite well, and generally put it in the back right from what I heard. But I didn't feel it did that well with the horns or the strings. I mean, I think we hear the horns just as loud in the front as in the back. But, you know, vocals in the back, vocals in the front. So we got the centered vocal sounding pretty accurate here. But, you know, the guitar not so much in the front right, definitely in the rear right. Violin's not sounding very prominent in its rear left channel. It's kind of going through each channel here. But yeah, I kind of felt like the horns and the violin weren't very prominent in the back while I was listening through that. That's what I wrote down on here. And then, you know, the tambourine, nothing did the tambourine all that well. The involve drums are a little prominent to the front, but there's plenty of bleed through in the back of the drums. Bass is heavy in the front. Guitar pans around right. I think it did better with the horns going to the back here. Yeah, I mean, here it's trying to cancel out those horns. So it did better with putting the horns in the back. But vocal completely gone from the back and clear in the front. And I'm just noticing something for the first time here. I'm noticing that when the vocal came in spots there, the guitar came in with it. It's struggling to keep the backs out of the front while the vocals singing. I didn't notice that in standard listening, but isolating it, that's an interesting observation. And that's probably, I mean, that's something we always know. The way things are mixed is going to affect how well something decodes or not. And we probably could find a lot more examples of that if we took a dive into everything. And here we hear plenty of tambourine in the front. And the tambourine sounds pretty much in the center of the room listening to it on either process. And the stereo effect of the tambourine in the back is completely gone. And that's one of the things about Matrix Quad in general. Matrix Quad is certainly capable of giving you a decent approximation of the mix, It can be enjoyable to listen to, but there are subtleties that you can hear in the discrete mixes that get lost in the matrix decoding. And so it's really a shame when matrix is the only thing you have. And I mean, there's certain things that I can think of that we only have matrix versions of out there, and who knows where the masters are. Or the only thing we have that's discrete is 8-track tape, which can be limiting in fidelity compared to vinyl. But matrix quad seriously compromises your mix. It really eliminates certain subtleties of the mix, and it can be quite enjoyed still, but you know, sometimes it's the best you have. But certainly when it comes to this track, I would definitely recommend, hands down, the discrete version over either of these processes. That said, if you have some EV-4 records, throwing them on your Involve decoder, certainly worthwhile to do. So, anyways, that kind of brings the EV-4 shootout to a close. Like I said, I highly recommend pulling out the new decode. Actually, I have that here. We can pull that up here for a bit, do a little comparison. So here's... That's the back channels of the Involve still going. We're going to close that. So, let's kind of, let's have a little fun here. Let's listen to the back channels of the old software, the one that was on the thing. Horns are kind of there. Guitar's in its place. But horns are very much leaked into the front. Alright, so here's the new script. I think those horns sound a little better in here. There's still some bleed through, but I don't think it's as prominent. Let's find a good starting point to really A-B this. Alright, so we're going to listen to front isolated of that. And we're going to listen to front isolated. That's not front isolated yet. I'm just queuing up the same point. Okay. So here's the version that was on the shootout. And here's the new script. It's not a world of difference, but I do think that I think it's cleaner. I think this one is... There's something up with those that bleed through. Maybe I'm nuts or hearing things, but I do think that the new... when digging into this, I did notice some things sound better on the new decode. The sunshine, then I know I'll realize. So it's, we got the... I don't hear any backup. Oh, yeah, they're there. Never mind. The violin is in the rear left. The guitar is in the rear right. This sounds pretty clean for the back of it. And if we bring up the old decode, we're going to have to skip ahead a little bit here. Alright, so let's see. You know, I should have done a little more prep and made some cue points. Alright, this is the part. You know, the guitar doesn't sound very clean here. Well, I don't know. Alright, so over here is where we had the violin and the guitar. No. Thank you for bearing with me if you're watching this later, because no one is tuned in tonight. So I hope you all watch this later. Alright, so here we go. Old script. I think the violin sounds kind of smeared. The guitar is in the right. I don't know if I want it to sound better. I mean, it's subtle, but I do think, I think just sitting in my chair when I pulled up the, because I did pull up the new version, the new decode, just today actually. So I kind of threw it up on my speakers, sat in my chair, and I remember thinking that the first decode sounded like a mess. And this one, I didn't get the impression of a mess. So I do think that, you know, listening to it without isolating things, I do think it's a better decode, the new one. So you know what? I'd like to hear comments. In fact, I'm going to post about this on the thread in the forum, and I'd like people to grab the new download from Oxford Dickey and go back to your shootout disc when you have a chance. And you know, maybe, you know, take an afternoon. It's not a bad song. It's, you know, it's One Fine Morning by Lighthouse. You know, who doesn't like that? You know, throw it on, compare the two software versions, maybe post some thoughts to the forum, and then put on the discrete version and enjoy it. You know, not that I'm saying that the software is not enjoyable. I'm saying that the Matrix in general less enjoyable than the discrete, but still interesting to hear how the script decoding continues to evolve. So yeah, the next thing I have lined up is digging into SQ, because that I had more materials for, and so you know, I really am excited about the QS, because, you know, that's really going to tell us, can this one decoder do QS and EV-4? We've seen that it can do EV-4, not perfectly, but it can do pretty convincing EV-4. And that's not. Let me just make it clear: this episode is not putting down the software decodes at all. You know, hey, more quad for all, more quad, more good. You know, software decodings are available to listen to. Decoders are out there to play your things. Isn't this a wonderful thing to have so many choices of quad to listen to? Too many choices for quad, not a bad thing. So this is not a contest. This is not a pissing match. Let's not have any hard feelings from anyone. I wish we could all just participate in the forums without any bad feelings. I really do. So yeah, SQ is the next one up, because I'm still trying to think about materials for QS. But I'm thinking less might be more when it comes to this. So maybe my lack of QS choices is a good thing, because I'm already trying to figure out cuts to make to what I was playing for SQ. Because I pulled up quite a few different things, because I do want to try to test different types of things. So, you know, and I also want to include things that are not available, easily available. They're not available in modern formats. You know, things that we would love reissue labels out there to put out, but they just can't seem to make it happen, or the industry is blocking it, you know, because all this, you know, stupid bullshit. Just release it. But so I figure we'll put you know, Frankenstein, Edgar Winter Group out there. You know, that should, you know, reissue. It should be a no-brainer on that. But I'm thinking it's a rather long track, and maybe it's not essential. I'm thinking of cutting that one. I included Evil Ways by Santana, but I don't have a discrete source of that sounds all that great. I have a DTS conversion. I pulled it out of my binder, ripped it, and it sounds awful. So I might just cut that, just because I really want to include some Santana, because there's so much of it. You know, there's one that, you know, hey, you know, the Chicago box set was great. Where's our Santana box set? And I included a Billy Joel track. I think that's a good simple test. I'm definitely going to leave that one in there. What else did I include? Sweet Emotion by Aerosmith. I think there's certain subtleties that whenever I listened to an SQ source, I felt like it got lost. So I kind of thought, you know, let's push this to its limit. Um, I included a Larry Coryell track, an Isaac Hayes track, because I wanted examples that were not Columbia records, but I don't know if that makes them essential. Maybe I'll cut the Isaac Hayes and leave the Larry Coryell. And then I included a few classical tracks. One is the one from E-Power Biggs, because I had a reel conversion from the Mike Robin reels. So I thought, that'd be a good example of kind of a classical. And also the Bartok Concerto for Group and Orchestra, because that's such a unique recording of being a classical in the set of surrounding the listener with the orchestra. But a movement from that is rather long, and I was thinking maybe to try to find a portion, but I'm wondering if maybe the E-Power Biggs just covers it for classical and I'll cut the rest. Maybe I did get tracks decoded, so maybe the other ones I'm going to cut, maybe I can include in like a second shootout just to post up there for give people the option to listen to it. But if you have all the free time in the world. So yeah, I think I'm going to try to pare that back, because we're going to have to do 2 SQ shootouts. Because certainly we want to compare the involved decoder to the software process, but also how does the involved SQ decoder compare to a Tate? And my Tate is still in the shop. It's been in the shop for years now. I actually talked to the guy who's repairing it on the phone sometime before the holidays, and he said he's getting settled in, so he should be. It's been most of the time was finding the chips, my chips fried on my Tate, and I actually bought a board from a Dolby decoder off of eBay that includes the same chips that the Tate used. I had them sent directly to him. He tested the chips, and I needed 2 chips, and there are 2 chips that are not as hard to find that are the same. One of them was good, one of them was bad on mine, and then there's the other chip that's really hard to find. On the Dolby board, the hard to find chip was still good. The other 2 chips were fried. So yeah, but he found the last chip. So I will be getting the Tate back eventually. But in the meantime, I sent my file out to who is that? One of Oxford Dickey's friends. I think I exchanged emails with him. I'm just scrolling through my emails. I think it's Captain Beyond is the person that does the decoder. Did the Tate decode for me. So yes, I found the email. So yes, Captain Beyond. So thanks to Oxford Dickey for all your software decoding that you've done for me. Always appreciate it. And thank you, Captain Beyond, for helping me out with the Tate decode for the upcoming SQ. So SQ Shootout Part 1 is going to be the Tate up against the Involve. And I can't wait to see how that one comes out, because I definitely want to talk a lot about that one, but I'm not talking much about it until it's done. And then I'm thinking that shootout will probably have a clear winner. If I do 2 decoders up against software, that's just confusing. Plus you got to listen to every song 4 times, and you're comparing 3 of them, and so I'm just gonna do decoder. And if we have a clear winner of decoders, I'm going to put that decoder up against the software, and that's how that's going to go. And then hopefully by then I've got some QS materials gathered together, and get some decodes done of that. I believe Captain Beyond has a QS decoder he can help me out with there, because I don't have a vintage QS decoder. That was another regret about the EV-4 shootout, was that I don't have a classic EV-4 decoder. And I was hoping to get my hands on one. I was hoping to borrow one or find one on eBay. I couldn't track one down. So I kind of felt like, that's no big loss. This has been held up for too long. Let's get on with it, because you know, in this day and age, there's not many EV-4 decoders out there, and I doubt someone's going to go on eBay to buy one. I don't see that vintage, that early in the quad game, doing much better than our modern processes. It still would have been very interesting to hear what did this sound like in the time period. If, you know, back in the day I went to a store and I wanted to buy this setup and this record, what am I going to hear versus what we could do today? That would have been a very interesting thing, but it wasn't worth holding out over that. Maybe someday I'll track one down and we can revisit this on a future Quadcast. Hey, maybe by then YouTube will have us streaming in surround. That would be nice to be able to actually really demonstrate in surround on these things. Except that no one's tuning in as I look at my 0 viewer count down there mocking me in the corner of my screen. And whoever tunes in probably is listening on earbuds anyways. So I'm sure you're all going to catch this later, though, on the replay, because it just posts it right to YouTube, so you can just play this whenever. So I hope when you do all tune into this, you all enjoy it. If anything, I hope you enjoy the results when I post them onto the forum, which I'm probably going to do after I wrap this up. I was going to try to throw things open to general conversation. I was kind of hoping to get a few people to tune in, and we got the chat room up. I got Skype up to take calls, and I was even going to invite people if you are set up with a microphone and a little tech savvy enough to click on a link and install a few plugins on your browser and troubleshoot when it goes wrong, as the Google Hangout plugin often does. But unfortunately, no one's been able to tune into the live. So, and it's been about an hour anyways, which I think is longer than most people are going to stay tuned in for. So, hey, thank you for watching. Any future Quadcast topics or suggestions, please feel free to reach out to me and post them to me. Don't forget Army of Quad on Twitter. Don't follow Quadcast on Facebook, and hang out at quadrophoniquad.com. You can always find me there. Any post discussion topics there, and send me tweets. Not hard to find me on other messengers. Army of Quad on AOL Instant Messenger. Army of Quad on Skype. So if you want to shoot me a message, just please don't send me the same message every few days until there's one guy out there that's been hounding me for answers to technical things that, I'm happy to help people out. But just give me a little time to get back to you. Anyways, thank you, everyone, for listening. Oh, and I'm hoping 2017 will be the year of the Foztex's mighty return, because I have got some Q8s that I am just dying to thread up on there, and the thing is just sitting there mocking me every time I look at it, and I've got I got a lot of the soldering done I need to get done, so it's now a matter of finishing up the soldering, figuring out what connectors go to which pins, because the pin layout's a little weird, and the wires, I don't know if I have all the color coding. I didn't know what the pin layout was on the heads I took off, so I don't know what wires go to what pins. And I'm just like, every time I start to think about it, I stop thinking about it because my brain starts to hurt. But I will figure that out. So, yeah, I really just need to finish a little bit of soldering, put everything back together nice and neat, and then deal with the noise issue of the way I got it currently set up and see if I could do something to minimize that. So, yeah, lots of great things to come in 2017. And, thank you for tuning in again. Good night.